We have a really amazing set of guests today. The first 40 minutes of this webinar, we're going to be talking about building AI for good, about creating scalable infrastructure. We're speaking with Sandra Huang, Head of Education and VP of Product at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. I'll give the formal bio after we start. We're also talking to Laurence Holt, Senior Advisor at the XQ Institute and Teaching Lab, where they are doing really amazing work to create all kinds of AI EdTech products. It's a really amazing institution. And Elizabeth Kelly, Head of Beneficial Deployments at Anthropic, who we are trying to make sure she can make it into the webinar today. We're doing our very best. And then for the last section of the webinar, we are going to be talking to Ryan Austin. He's the founder and CEO of Cognota, and Ellen, which does L&D for adult learners in really interesting new ways, is sort of creating a whole new category. And Alan Todd, Vice Chairman of StartEd and EdTech Week. And of course, this webinar is brought to you in conjunction with EdTech Week. EdTech Week is coming up in just a couple of weeks. It's happening at Columbia University in New York. I have my tickets and I'm going to be hosting a panel there. I hope, and everybody on this podcast is going on this webinar. I keep saying podcast. Everybody on this webinar will be there as well. They will be there presenting all sorts of big ideas about AI and EdTech. And if you don't have your tickets, it's still not too late. We're just a couple of weeks out. Sharon, if you can actually jump to the next slide just for a moment. So, this webinar is done in conjunction with StartEd's EdTech Week. It's October 20th to 22nd, just a couple of weeks away. Huge group of amazing thought leaders. And you get 20% off if you don't have your tickets yet, 20% off with the code EdTech Insiders. We are really looking forward to seeing you there. And it's looking like our panel is almost complete. We're almost there. So we will just about to start off. Oh, hold on. Yes. For those who don't know EdTech Insiders is a community of education technology professionals. We do podcasts. We're actually about to hit our 400th episode of the podcast, if you can believe that, over the last 4 years. We do online events. We do in-person events, including in New York and often in California and around the country. And we put out a newsletter every couple of weeks about, ideally everything you need to know about the education technology and AI world, which is an incredibly fast-moving world and a really exciting one as well, as we all know. So I think we are very close here to kicking off. We're just a moment after the hour, and we really appreciate everybody being in the room with us today. Just finalizing our last panelist. All right. There we go. All right. And so I think we can kick it off right now. So, Sharon, if you don't mind going to the next slide, let's start our conversation. First off, this is us, the EdTech Insiders team. I am Alex Sarlin. I am the CEO and co-founder of EdTech Insiders. Sarah Morin, who is the head of content at EdTech Insiders, runs our newsletter and all sorts of things around our events. And Jen LaPaz, operations lead, who has done a huge amount of work, as she always does, to set up and promote this webinar. More importantly, let's get to our panelists today. Next slide, please. We have a all-star panel, true AI superheroes today. Elizabeth Kelly is the head of beneficial deployments at Anthropic, where she works to ensure that AI benefits all of humanity. She was the founding director of the U.S. Artificial Intelligence Safety Institute at the U.S. Department of Commerce. She served as special assistant to the president for economic policy at the White House National Economic Council, where she was a driving force behind the Biden administration's AI policy. She was also a senior policy advisor on the Biden-Harris transition team and in the Obama White House. House. In the private sector, Elizabeth was Senior Vice President of Growth for Capital One Investing, which acquired United Income, a fintech startup that she helped grow as an SVP of operations. She holds a JD from Yale Law School, a master's in comparative social policy from the University of Oxford, I've heard of that, and a BA from Duke University. And she was recognized by Time Magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in AI in 2024. We also have Sandra Huang. She's the head of education and vice president of product at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. Before joining CZI, she was the head of product at Quora, where a platform for gaining and sharing knowledge, where she served as their very first product manager and oversaw its growth to 100 million monthly unique users. Sandra previously led product development at Google, in roles at Google and Facebook, where she managed complex interdisciplinary teams building tools and products such as Google AdWords and Google AdSense. She holds bachelor's and master's degrees from Stanford University. And last but not least, Laurence Holt is senior advisor at XQ Institute and Teaching Lab, former chief product officer at Amplify. He founded the 300-person consulting firm Quidnunc. I may be pronouncing that wrong, but I'm going to try, was a Credit Suisse first Boston bond trader, contributed to Microsoft Outlook, and has written 3 award-winning books. He holds degrees in both computer science and neuroscience. True all-star panel here today. So Sandra, I want to start with you. This webinar is all about building AI for good, and Learning Commons, which is CZI's education initiative, just launched 3 major tools to support the AI education field: a K-12 knowledge graph with 24,000 learning objectives, educational evaluators for AI-generated content, and open educational resources. It builds on a decade or more of CZI's work with learning science. So the question you have to start is, why make these available to the entire field as shared infrastructure rather than keeping them proprietary?
Yeah, thanks, Alex, for the intro, for hosting. I think all of us are super excited to be here and kick off Friday together. So appreciate the question. And I think you kind of allude to our work at CZI historically being a big part of that, being funding learning science work, as well as building EdTech ourselves. And I think through those experiences, we really saw some of the challenges of bringing what we know about learning and teaching actually all the way through this translation process to make it to multiple classrooms and teachers and students. And that process is very difficult, if not maybe sort of a little broken in education. There's just not the mechanisms for that translation. And that's something we've learned firsthand. And also have had a lot of empathy and understanding of the educator experience on the sort of the last mile end, where they have access to potentially excellent curriculum, excellent ed tech tools, but they're still piecing together a lot of things for the diverse set of students that are in front of them, right? There's a lot of work on educators. And so I think a combination of those things really has galvanized our work, which we're excited to, we're now called Learning Commons as the education work, but to really think about what are the infrastructural pieces that could help the entire field really solve that challenge of everyone starting at a different place. Everyone has their own knowledge graph. Everyone's got, I think great resources, but then we're not able to piece together. And I think we're not able to take advantage of technology, right? As best as we could if we had more of these common infrastructural pieces. And as a philanthropy, we can take a really long-term view. And I think that's a helpful perspective that we can bring, obviously in partnership with many folks, both on this call and beyond, but really think about how do we then leverage the ways AI can help us translate what we know from the research, what we know about teaching and learning, and how might we actually be able to better scale those good learning and teaching practices, and potentially just really raise the floor so that we can serve students better and give educators really better tools so they're not piecing together things that actually I think a computer can do upstream, so that they can really have better tools to do the things that they do really well, which is engage students in the classroom. So yeah, that's
Yes.
how we think about it. Yeah.
that shared infrastructure and making data sets that are relevant to classrooms available for everyone can just raise the floor for everyone and just raise the standard for everyone. And Elizabeth, let me pass it to you because there's a partnership here. And Anthropic has built model context protocol connectors that allow Claude to access the Learning Commons knowledge graph directly. So people can actually use Claude to look for curriculum, look for standards, to look for learning objectives. What does this partnership enable for you, and how does it align with Anthropic's overall approach to beneficial deployments in education?
Thanks, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here. And let me first say just how excited we are to be working with the CCI team and supporting the build out of the MCP connector so it can be used across not only Claude.ai, but across the whole AI ecosystem. So, taking a step back, our education strategy at Anthropic is to ensure that the AI tools that we and others build are not only useful, but are actually leading to improved learning outcomes for students. This isn't aligned to any revenue goals, but rather what we feel is our social responsibility and the way we can have the biggest impact in the world. A big part of this strategy is to support public good infrastructure, which is why we were so glad that CZI wanted to partner on this initiative. And it goes back to why we at Anthropic created the Model Context Protocol in the first place. The Model Context Protocol, or the MCP as it's called, was designed to be an open standard to connect AI assistants to data sources. What we noticed was that AI assistants were getting smarter, but they're still limited by the data sources they have or don't have access to. And MCP aims to make it much easier for developers and users to connect their AI assistants to a wide variety of data sources. Education's no different. We know that teachers are using Claude and other AIs in their classrooms, everything from designing assignments to creating interactive learning tools. And EdTech developers are building on top of our API. But often these AI conversations are not as grounded in the pedagogy and standards and best practices as teachers would like. And so by working with CZI on this MCP server, teachers and EdTech developers alike can now make sure that their AI has access to world-class pedagogical knowledge. Once again, what makes AI so effective is not just the intelligence of the underlying LLM, but rather the data and expertise that it can pull in. This is now live on Claude.ai, and we're also hoping that other companies will adopt the server. We really see this as a race to the top,
Yes.
and know there's a big need for public infrastructure in this space, and are excited to be playing a role here.
Race to the top is a great way to put it. It's obviously an education phrase and one that I think really applies here. It's pulling everybody up and giving everybody access to really important information. And so, Laurence, let me pass this to you. You have supported a lot of different edtech companies. You've chronicled a huge number of AI education companies. You've been making sense of this space for years now, and you've noted, as well as many have noted, that there was a sort of first generation of AI edtech that was in different size wrappers around the frontier models like Anthropic. Thin wrappers, thick wrappers, trying to make the use cases work. But we're now going deeper. I feel like we're maturing as a space and thinking about how AI might actually use the pedagogy that Elizabeth mentions, actually transform education for the better. So the question I have for you is, what critical infrastructure gaps remain? What is keeping us still from being able to have that fully integrated, really powerful ecosystem where every AI edtech tool can be pedagogically sound and usable? And what has been happening when every individual company has to sort of solve this problem on their own? What do we benefit from if we make it a shared infrastructure?
Great question. And I love the idea that we're growing up with AI. First, let me just say, though, and echo Elizabeth, that I feel this announcement from CZI is sort of incredibly welcome. I spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs and innovators for whom even just figuring out standards state by state is sucks a huge amount of energy. But now the data sets like that and others are a public good, that they can redirect that energy to true innovation. So congratulations, Sandra and team. But this is overdue. Gaps, infrastructure gap. Well, there are lots of gaps beside infrastructure. Maybe we'll get to some of them, but infrastructure gaps, I think of two and a half. So one is data sets. That's probably the biggest one, where there are models are kind of good enough at understanding mathematics and generating worksheets and lessons to sort of fool you that what they're creating is great. And actually, usually it's sort of okay right now, getting better for sure. But data sets that we can use to train models, or even just to paste into your prompt, uses context, sort of instantly upgrade the model's ability to understand not just the math, but how students think about the math, misconceptions, gaps, etc. And that makes your AI smarter. So what entrepreneurs get out of it is they, for little or no work, they're getting data sets that can dramatically improve what they're offering for teaching and learning. So that's a big plus. There are many more. Learning Commons is releasing some now, and there are lots more that I know they're thinking about and we're thinking about. Second area would be evals, or the evaluators, which CZI is also leading the way on, which is really just a way to grade your AI, right? Automatically say whether what it's generating is good or not. And that's actually quite hard to do. But is a lesson good? Is the feedback that I just gave a student, or a model just gave a student, is that good? Evals can help us figure out what good is, and that focuses everybody on making them better. So that also can be a huge upgrade. And then the half is, you might not think of as infrastructure, but I'm going to say research. In as much as research is one of the foundations that is only just beginning to emerge. And I mean, for all of these innovations that are happening in AI that are used in education, are they actually effective? Do they work? And their progress has been so fast that research hasn't quite caught up yet, but we're starting to see that. And again, it keeps everybody honest. So it helps us focus on what's actually working. There has been some great work by the Scale Initiative at Stanford, that Alex, I know, is now integrated with the EdTech Insiders map that you and I worked on. So that is starting to happen too. But those are three big areas that we just need much more of.
Yeah, data sets, research, shared research structure. These are pieces of the puzzle that are starting to come into focus now, and they're really important. I'm hoping that education research can be open sourced in some way, and we can actually start to get the history of education research as well as the future of it. So Sandra, one of the things you've said about the knowledge graph that I think is really interesting is that you think about it as a GPS for learning, right? It's about, you really don't know where you're at unless you have a little bit of a system saying, where am I? Where am I going? The evaluators tell you what's good or not. The knowledge graph can ground you in the standards, can ground you in really high quality instructional materials. Can you walk us through what the knowledge graph actually contains, or what the CZI, the Learning Commons tools actually contain, and how they can really help EdTech developers and educators understand where students are at and make their tools better pedagogically?
Yeah, happy to do that. And, I'll maybe move between the vision of what knowledge graph can be, and then also where we're starting, which is, I think, just a starting point. And, I think in this idea, what I described earlier of educators needing to piece together things on the other end, what we've talked about here of EdTech developers and innovators needing to piece together, there is a lot of, to me, it's almost an inefficiency that this is not the hard part, right? The fact that we have 50 states, Common Core, all the standards, that's a known body. And but what we could benefit from is really a more granular understanding of the learning components that sit behind different standards, because we use different language in different places and there's different priorities. That's all good and fine. And if we could map a little bit more granularly, we could actually navigate and actually have it be machine readable, that you can sort of traverse across different state standards and better understand, okay, yep, all these states mean the same thing or not the same thing, and it's broken out, and it's possible to break out into these deeper learning components. So where we've started with the knowledge graph today is we've worked with many amazing partners that have done this work for a long time. One, EdTech, really has the body of the state standards, and we have worked with partners like Achievement Network as well as student achievement partners to better understand the learning components that sit behind. And our knowledge graph also offers the relationships, the mapping between these two different data sets. And I think one exciting opportunity is as we dig in, we're starting with math. There's reasons that is a little more, structured and concrete. What are the real progressions? What are the different pathways to learn and traverse and gather the knowledge for math? And so that's where we've started. And I think the really exciting part is, again, we've called this a graph because it's like a complex map, and there's different pathways. And so I like the GPS analogy a little bit because that underlying data lets us be more precise. I'd have a hard time giving you directions to my house if there weren't like the markers along the way or the streets. And so being able to have that be common infrastructure from a data standpoint, I think will be really helpful for us to kind of go deeper. And again, in the future vision, I think math is just a starting point. There's obviously the other academic areas, skills beyond, and the research could have more common language to talk about how to support different types of learners through accessing it and moving through and acquiring all that knowledge. So anyway, I hope that that's a sort of a frame of both our vision and the opportunities if we continue to sort of be able to work. It's really a field level piece, and the Learning Commons team is holding some of the technology infrastructure, but really is a field level need, I think, an opportunity. And then sort of hopefully that explains a little bit of where our starting point, just as we've gotten going with our early release last week.
Yeah, and I think the GPS is a terrific metaphor. I mean, if you go into the Learning Commons data files or you go into the Claude connector, and Elizabeth, I'm going to ask you about, how that works next, you can literally position any given piece of content and say, what are the learning objectives behind this? How does it align to different state standards, including the Common Core? What is the progression? What are the prerequisites behind it? What would you recommend for how to teach it? These are things that have been missing in the frontier models because they're complex. They're not something that can just be, even with incredibly sophisticated AI, you need to know about the context. You need context to be able to make sense of these, and some of these organizations really provide that. So Elizabeth, let me pass it to you. Can you explain how the MCP connector in Claude works to give people access to this knowledge graph, and some use cases about how they might use it to improve their outputs for AI?
Sure. Let's take an example. A teacher might go into Claude.ai and ask, can you create a diagnostic assessment for the specific skills needed for the 6 RPA1 ratios and proportional relationship standard in California? Teachers are often wanting to get help from AI, but they want to make sure it's aligned to the precise standard in their state and curriculum. And so when Claude has access to the knowledge graph MCP, it can track down all the details for that particular 6 RPA1 standard, then drill down into the specific skills the students need to master that larger standard, and even identify the prerequisite skills that feed into it. All of that knowledge graph context is then passed in the Claude context window so that Claude can start making a comprehensive diagnostic assessment in a Claude artifact that's grounded in that standard. Now, to be clear, like all of that magic is happening behind the scenes, pulling from the relevant standards and curricula to ensure that the teacher is getting the best pedagogical advice back. But what you see is sort of pulling all of this together, and we've been blown away by the excitement for this MCP server that we've seen expressed across the ecosystem, both in the US and even globally, and the interest that we've seen since the announcement in adopting this knowledge graph, building on top of it, just huge possibility here.
Yeah, it's a really exciting, it's not a vision anymore. It's an exciting vision, but it's being made real and being expanded on, as you both mentioned, consistently. There's a lot to build still, but this really changes the landscape for what AI can do, for what frontier AI can do right out of the box, with this additional information being added to the context window. And so, Laurence, you mentioned sort of in passing, when EdTech developers don't have to worry as much about standards alignment, or don't have to worry about creating their own evaluation systems internally from scratch and saying, well, what's coming out of our AI systems, and what should we trust it, and what do we have to do? We have to hire a whole team to evaluate it. When some of these pieces start becoming a little more streamlined and shared, what becomes unlocked? What are things that they can then focus on? What could they focus their energy on instead that would move the field forward in other ways?
Yeah, and 6 RPA1, by the way, one of my favorite standards. Thanks for featuring ratios. It's really interesting that education, teaching and learning is such a big use case for these frontier models. I think there was actually an Anthropic survey that showed something like 10% of interactions with with Claude are about education, about learning something. Even though the models are, on the face of it, not a great fit for tutoring or for learning, because they want to be helpful and they want to do the work for you. And in many scenarios, that's excellent. But in learning, it's sort of the opposite of what you kind of want. You want the student doing the work, the cognitive work. So what the CZI, the path the CZI is starting down, actually holds out the hope of sort of fixing that, being the additional piece that is missing that makes models just a much better fit for generating lessons and great learning experiences. But yes, plenty of big, hairy questions remain. To touch on some of them, what is the role of the teacher going to be? There are people trying to innovate around how, this really changes if more and more instruction can come from smart machines. How does that change the role of the teacher? How does it change motivation of the learner? What do we think about screen time? And can AI support more social learning, like small groups and whole class discussion? And we're seeing people kind of innovate around that area. Or durable skills, creativity, collaboration. Can AI support me in doing that? More sort of transferable lifelong skills. And I guess fundamentally, practices that we know from the research work well in classrooms, but are not widespread. Can AI support the teachers in just making it much easier to scale those practices? I'm thinking of things like differentiation, or practice itself, just doing math practice, for instance, or thinking. How do we get more of that happening? And we know sort of how to do it, but scaling the implementation is always hard. Maybe that's the real magic that AI can provide in classrooms. So plenty of these things still to unlock.
Yeah, scaling implementation is a great way to put it. It's like, when every individual educator is working with AI tools to figure out how to bring it into the classroom and use it for best practice pedagogy, everybody's sort of on an island doing it by themselves. But as we have a shared infrastructure, people can sort of get more energy and room to think about, how does this work for my exact classroom? How do I make this social and not just people looking at screens? How do I think about, meeting this one kid who's been totally demotivated? It sort of opens things up in a whole different way. Sandra, you've mentioned some of the partners that CZIs had worked with, and I think one of the really interesting approaches here is that you're working with renowned experts in very particular fields. So you mentioned student achievement partners. They have an SCASS rubric. They think about cohesive learning a lot. And then you're using annotated data sets from expert teachers. This is a really collaborative approach. I'd love to hear you talk about that approach and sort of that concept of bringing organizations that have thought for a long time about, project-based learning or about mindset or about, disengagement for students, and sort of really bringing them in to a shared infrastructure so that everybody can benefit from their work.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think in a lot of, we've talked about knowledge graph for a bit, and then this other body of work that we're also, again, early days in, is really thinking about evaluation and how to help both EdTech, the developers themselves, but also schools and educators kind of understand what's good, right? And again, the foundational models will continue to improve, and that's awesome. But then to make sure it's working well for the classroom context, the learning context, I think having these additional evaluation tools are really important. But I think my starting point is sort of, again, this decade of funding and working with amazing partners who know a lot about the implementation challenges, what educators are ought to do from a pedagogical standpoint, what students need. There's a lot of knowledge there, but there is not always the ability to map that into something that can be more scalable. We're sort of can scale through, and our education system is very distributed and fragmented. So scaling is inherently a difficult thing. But what we see as an opportunity is to lift up the expertise that's been built up and help these organizations scale that expertise into different types of building blocks, a different type of interface that in this AI moment, when we both have AI as a technology to leverage, but also the technology transformation itself as an opportunity to think about the building blocks. That's very exciting if we can partner with, the ANETs of the world, the SAPs, to think about what do they know, how do we help them scale those insights and make that really be able to reach more classrooms across the world. So that's how we think about it. And with the evaluation tools, we've been taking fairly narrow cuts. We're starting, there's like a third and fourth grade. Again, very narrow because quality is very important. And we want to make sure that what we're putting out there is a helpful evaluation tool. But again, we're also figuring out the right process to bring in both validated rubrics as well as that expert annotation to provide, again, something that is going to really help us improve.
So when you say the third and fourth grade and in math, if somebody is evaluating AI output using one of your third or fourth grade evaluators, what are they evaluating it for? Can you just explain for the audience?
Yeah. Our evaluation tools are actually mostly right now that we put out in the literacy space. So while the knowledge graph is kind of mapping in the math side, on the evaluator side, in literacy. And that makes a lot of sense because LLMs are generating words and writing, and a lot of that is applied to educational content. And so we're starting there to think about text complexity for third and fourth grade. And that the thing with literacy, as most of you know, or many of you know, it's a much more amorphous thing, right? That's why we have rubrics to sort of assess. It's not like a math problem that you could maybe more break down in more binary ways. And so it itself is a different texture of challenge. And so in that area, we're looking at text complexity, sentence structure, vocab, to really give grade level appropriateness, to make sure, as a developer, if you're trying to serve XYZ grades, it's helpful to have these mechanisms because AI development is not deterministic, right? You need the mechanisms to give you signal on whether you're hitting the mark or not.
Yeah. And so speaking of, hitting the signal and the amorphousness of that signal in various ways, Laurence, I want to pass it to you because one of the things that's been true forever in education is there just isn't always agreement on what makes a good lesson or a good assessment or a good piece of feedback. So in that world, the fact that we don't all necessarily agree on the underlying pedagogy, how do we create useful evaluation infrastructure when educators may have slightly or very different ways of thinking about pedagogy? How could this evaluation suite that CZI and Learning Commons is working on start to encompass lots of different pedagogical approaches?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I sort of sense some pushback against evals in education, because here we have humans in education. And by the way, if you're not familiar with the world of evaluations and just if you were an AI researcher, you'd be thinking about them every day. It's part of how that field has really accelerated, and it's going to be part of our world. And the reason is the power of an eval is it just becomes extremely cheap and quick to take any tool and say, is it generating good stuff? And as soon as you can do that, everybody can focus on making it better instead of marketing speak that makes it sound like it's better, right? So that's the power, and it's amazing power. But you raise a good point in terms of like what's a good lesson. It's very difficult to tell. There is not full agreement. There is, though, full agreement on what a bad lesson is, right? It's not actually teaching the thing it's supposed to be teaching, or it's not accounting for kids who have gaps in their learning that needs to be filled, or providing scaffolding, or lots of ways that you can write a bad lesson, and we can begin to identify those, and I think gradually move towards what real goodness is, and allow more than one answer for goodness, because there is more than one answer for different kids. We're not looking for one size fits all, and we can also start with more narrow focused evals, exactly as Sandra was describing, where we really do know. So for instance, what is the text complex? Is this text going to confuse kids? We can get really good at that. How is this language supporting autonomy or growth mindset? We can easily create evaluations for that, and CZI are sharing some. So we can sort of build from these narrow cases to the bigger one. But any of this progress is going to help us focus on the right things to be building and how to make them better. And that surely is something we can all agree on.
Yeah, I think you make such a good point about the role of benchmarks and evaluations in the AI space in general. I think one of the big ironies of the AI space is in many ways what the AI frontier models are competing on are benchmarks that are often meant to simulate basically what a student knows or what a human knows. So I mean, we all saw it go up from it was a high school student, and then Bill Gates put out this famous thing: if it can pass the AP bio exam, then come talk to me. And now it's PhD, and now it's becoming, it's basically assessing whether the AI models can think at very high levels. So they're basically evaluating the AI models the way we evaluate students. And, Claude 4.5 Sonnet just came out this week and is, surpassing other models in that type of benchmark. So Elizabeth, let me pass it to you. I'd love to hear you talk about the benchmarks, but also you're playing such an interesting role in this space at this moment. You're the foundation model powering many different AI EdTech platforms, including, Magic School, which just passed 6 million teachers. And you're also, in this particular case, providing the sort of last mile, the interface for the shared infrastructure where educators or ed tech companies can access the knowledge graph. At the same time, you don't serve students under 18. That's the Anthropic policy. So, this is such an interesting combination of factors, of roles that Anthropic plays. I'd love to hear you talk about the role you feel like Anthropic plays in this partnership ecosystem.
So at Anthropic, we're excited to have many of the leading ed techs building on top of our API and infrastructure. That's everyone from Magic School to PlayLab to Amira Learning. The list goes on. And I think what resonates with these companies is our deep commitment to privacy, safety, and guardrails, as well as really putting out a lot of the best models as evidenced by the release of Sonnet 4.5 this week. This is especially important to have these guardrails, these privacy safeguards in place when ed tech companies are serving students. When, especially if they're serving students under 18 years old, when they're building on top of our API, where we really think there does need to be a standard of care. You need an AI that's going to stay within the guardrails. And that's why many of the ed tech organizations have decided to use Claude to power large parts of their system. Going back to what I said earlier, everything we're doing at Anthropic is really about how can we improve learning outcomes, do what's best for the students. In the higher ed space, you see this in the learning mode that we have rolled out, which to Laurence's point, really helps students in their critical thinking journey at that above 18, rather than just giving them the answers, because that's not actually how you learn and evolve and grow. And we think that, we need both the safety and the pedagogy to really deliver a transformative experience for teachers and students, which again is why we're so thrilled about this partnership.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating role. It sort of is the underlying brains behind so many of these really powerful tools, and also can serve as the sort of last mile delivery, especially like the study mode you're mentioning, where college students or 18 or over can use it to create their own study paths and use it as a tutor. So we just have a couple of minutes left, so we're going to do a little bit of a lightning round. We're going to go around the horn quickly here. So I'd ask you to keep your answers a little short just on this last question. But this is really about sort of a call to action, like what's next. So Sandra, let me start with you. What should developers look at first when it comes to all the tools Learning Commons has put out? How can they get involved? How can they become beta testers or start using the tools?
Yeah, we would love for folks to kind of check out what we've done. Learningcommons.org is the easiest starting place. And then you can pop over to our GitHub repository. We have a documentation, a set of documentation resources, and basically kind of can get into the data sets that we put out in the early release. There's also a place to sign up for our private beta, where we're kind of working more closely with some developers and trying to make sure we're nailing the right use cases that are important to developers. And, I just shout out to the Anthropic team. I'm just grateful for all the partnership and the work and just the way that their implementation is exemplifying what's in there. So encourage folks to really check out that Claude connector to kind of play with what's underneath, and hopefully it'll inspire additional, innovation and ideas as we continue to work together.
Fantastic. And Elizabeth, for somebody who's interested in testing out the MCP connectors and this Claude interface, what could they try today to add value and speed to their AI processes?
You can log into Claude.ai, add the MCP connector from the MCP library, and then just start to ask questions as any teacher would. You can try asking questions with a knowledge graph enabled versus not, and then you'll see how important it is to really have the right data and pedagogy. in the AI context. As I mentioned, we just released Sonnet 4.5 last week. It's our best model yet, more intelligent than our previous smartest model, Opus 4.1, and more than 5x cheaper. And one of the fun things about the AI space is everything is moving so quickly that continuing to play, experiment, try out new things, it's amazing what you can unlock.
Wonderful. Laurence, you get the trickiest call to action here, which is what should people do to help address some of the unlocks that you're still thinking about? What's the top of your wish list for what needs to happen next to continue to make pedagogical transformation through AI possible?
You know, a lot of what's going on in terms of AI improvement these days is reinforcement learning, which means if a model or if AI isn't giving you something you want, you think it could have a better answer, then it's in the data set, right? It can learn. We just don't yet have all the data that we need to have it learn the things we want it to learn. And education in particular, we have a lot of data, but it's tough to get at. So the more of that we can free up and create great data sets, for instance, tutoring, like what is good tutoring? If we have a data set that answers that, then we can have models that can do it. And that's going to really power us forward.
Agreed. It's so interesting, as we think about the data needed to make pedagogical transformation, I think we're starting to think about data in a very new way. What do the best tutors do? What do students do to teach themselves that actually works? That's data that we don't always have access to. There's a huge amount of data still to be collected or unlocked. There's research still to be collected and unlocked. And of course, everybody should keep a close eye on what Learning Commons and Anthropic are doing, because this is the beginning. As Sandra mentioned a few times, this is the launch of a whole suite of different interesting tools that are coming over the next years. And we are only getting started. So thank you so much to everybody on the panel. This has been a really, really fascinating conversation. And we are going to move to our second half of our webinar now. Our third, we should say, our last 20 minutes. This is going to be a really interesting conversation. This is all about scaling what works in EdTech. So I want to introduce our panelists. Ryan Austin is a serial entrepreneur who's spent over 10 years driving improvements in learning and development. In his current role as founder and CEO at Cognota, Ryan is focused on developing innovative products to help learning teams increase productivity and automate operational processes, what he calls Learn Ops. Prior to Cognota, Ryan served as Senior Vice President for World Trade Group. He co-founded Go Fish Cam, an underwater camera that sits on your fishing line. That sounds fascinating. He studied sociology at York University, business and corporate communications at Western University, and all sorts of different kinds of entrepreneurship accelerators, including StartEd. Alan Todd is an EdTech entrepreneur. He's the vice chairman of StartEd, the executive chair of Cognota, and the founder of CorpU, which was recently acquired by Udemy. He's a Wharton Entrepreneur in Residence. He's also been named Inc. Magazine Entrepreneur of the Year. He's a founding trustee of Harrisburg University and a former trustee of Dickinson College. Welcome to the webinar. So this first question is for both of you, but I'm going to start with you, Alan. First, tell us a little bit about how you got involved with StartEd and what StartEd does for the EdTech ecosystem.
Yeah, thank you, Alex, and thanks to the prior panelists. That was a great conversation. There's so many connections to things that I think we're going to talk about next. But StartEd is a company. I've known Jonathan and Ash, the founders that have been around for 11 years with StartEd and EdTech Week. And I've always been in touch. I've been a mentor. And I was looking for something to do to start the next phase of my life after I finished my tenure with Udemy. They acquired my company. And my personal mission in life has always been to grow leaders who grow organizations that change the world. And I have a tremendous opportunity to help grow leaders who grow EdTech businesses that change the world. We have like 400 or 500 mentors that volunteer at StartEd throughout the year to help incubate and accelerate companies. And so I'm now jumping in. We're raising a fund. We're doing advisory work with people like Ryan here at Cognota and building a team of advisors to be sort of a McKinsey-like set of services for companies as they start to scale and need access to people who have been there and done that to help achieve scale and reduce hitting of road bumps, speed bumps.
Yeah, and so speaking of, reducing hitting of speed bumps, Ryan, introduce yourself and a little bit more about what Cognota does. And I'd love to hear you talk about your relationship with StartEd and what it's done to help you avoid some of those speed bumps.
Yeah, no, thanks, Alex. And fun fact about Go Fish Cam, it was just meant to be a side project with my brother, but somebody, a private equity company, it became successful. Somebody actually acquired it, so that was kind of cool.
Right.
But yeah, my background is really in entrepreneurship because I was a bad student. Just the traditional ways of learning didn't work for me in a classroom setting. My mind would race. I would be listening, but I'd leave the classroom without remembering anything that was taught. And in order for me to learn, I really have to get my hands dirty, fail, try again, succeed, do the next thing, fail, try again, succeed. And that really works for me. So entrepreneur became my finding. Um, the story with StartEd actually. Uh, Predates StartEd, back to something that Ash and Jonathan Harbour were involved in called EdTech, or EdTech. And Jonathan Harbour and I met through that program, and he actually now became the independent board member at Cognota. So that's one of the connections there. Simultaneously, Alan Todd and I were in a chief learning officer group together and became friends. And we all sat down at lunch at one of the StartEd events, actually. And Jonathan and Alan reconnected and saw this mutual point on Cognota and said, Cognota should be the next success story with our StartEd advisory group. And I was in, like, having the opportunity to work alongside Alan and Jonathan and collaborate with Ash is like a recipe for success. So
Yeah.
back in that program, we were a service company and we had a strong thesis that we started to form that business functions like revenue, marketing, product, they all have their own purpose-built operating systems to actually plan work, manage resources, measure impact, things like that. But learning and development, corporate learning and development did not. These enterprise learning teams just didn't have an operating system. They had their content tools and their learning management systems, but a place where they can actually manage the business function and the business of learning just didn't exist. So we stood on stage and pitched the idea and kind of won that contest, even though we were the only company without software or had zero product. But somehow we got in the newspaper because of that, and ExxonMobil read about us and offered us a pilot project. So I moved from Toronto to New York for this project, and from New York to Houston, Texas, and lived in ExxonMobil's office for about a year and built this product and launched a company. So that's
Wow.
the story there.
That's the story. When an idea is powerful, sometimes just the pitch can get you all the way to product market fit. And that concept of learn ops, right, of connecting the value of learning and development and corporate development to actual bottom line revenue and actually tracking it. It's an idea that's had, I think, it's been a long time coming in learning development. So it feels like a really core idea. Well, Alan, let's talk a little bit more about how StartEd works with companies. You work with companies at different stages. Some are still finding product market fit. They're still trying to figure out what they're doing. Others, like Cognota, have found it and are ready to scale. What does the process look like for diagnosing where a company is actually at and where sometimes versus where they may think they are? And how do you tailor support? How does StartEd sort of organize its support structure for different companies at different stages?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. It's a great question because I think one of the things that I've observed is there are a lot of startups, like Ryan just told the story about having this great idea, and then ExxonMobil heard about it, and then he embeds and turns it into something that becomes a company that is now a great company that's raising money and scaling so you sort of take it down the line. I think we try to help diagnose where are you on this sort of product market fit. Do you have a novel idea? Do you understand the customer that you're going after and the job to be done and the problem to be solved? Have you really thought about and had deep empathy for the user that you are going after. And as you're thinking about building a company, do you know what you stand for? Do you have a purpose? And I would say in the early stage, companies do a poor job, founders do a poor job of answering all those questions with clarity. And so I think, so at StartEd, we'll see, I don't know, hundreds of companies a year will go through like EdTech Week. And out of this like giant batch, call it 1,000 companies, maybe a couple hundred get down to apply to Shark Tanks. We help them refine the pitch, refine the investor pitch or the customer pitch, get them ready. So, like when they go show up at EdTech Week, there will be a whole bunch of companies that have been vetted and screened and coached to get really good at that story in that very early stage. And so we just follow the stages along. Once you get a couple of customers that believe in you, a couple, we call them lighthouse accounts. If you have 2 or 3 lighthouse accounts, they love what you're doing for them and they would shout it from the rooftops, then you have all of the sort of the basic foundational requirements to go to the next phase and say, how do I invest in sales and marketing to take 3 customers that have a generalizable problem that we've solved with a new to world innovation. And remember, 5 out of 10, 7 out of 10 times, it isn't a new to world innovation. And the market susses that out pretty quickly. But when you get there, then you get to the next stage. And now you find some generalizable characteristics and you start to put a little bit of force behind that to drive that repeatable sales. Can I go from 3 to 10? And that's a really, really hard thing to do. It's a whole different set of problems that you solve from finding that product market fit. And then it starts all over again. Once you have about 10, you sort of tear up that playbook and you start all over again at the very next phase. And at every stage, you're trying to not run out of money. You're trying to remove roadblocks out of the way. And so we have expert advisors who have been there and done that, senior, like everything from CEOs to chief revenue officers, chief product and technology officers that affiliate with StartEd that just want to give back or be part of the ecosystem to drive early innovation. People that have been, 20 years in their career, maybe 30 years in their career, and they love the idea of working on the cutting edge. And so what's so much fun about what we do, what we all do, including you, Alex, and everybody on this call, is we're working on the frontier of where are the new to world innovations coming that are going to solve the vexing big critical education issues, not just in K-12, but higher education, workplace. How is the workplace going to change over the next 20 or 30 years? And how does that change what we have to learn? I mean, it just couldn't be a more exciting time to be doing the work that we all do together, to be standing at this precipice right now.
Yeah, I love that phrase, new to world innovation. That's not one I've used before, but I think that's really powerful. And so it reminds me of that Marshall Goldsmith book. What got you here won't get you there, right? It's the first few companies need one playbook, 3 to 10, another playbook, 10 to 100, another playbook. Speaking of new to world innovations, Ryan, you are creating a new category. I mean, with this idea of learn ops, that there's a sort of double-edged sword of doing something that's truly new. It's exciting. It's novel. People want to be on board. And at the same time, they don't know what it is. They don't know how to buy it. They don't always know what you're even talking about. And sometimes the sales cycle is longer. You have to do a lot of education at the same time as sales and marketing. I'd love to hear you talk about that because I think that's true of a lot of EdTech entrepreneurs. I'm sure people on this call also feel like, hey, I'm showing them the future with my tool, but they don't know how to buy it. They don't know, they can't fit it into their existing paradigms. How do you approach that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and if you can avoid category creation, do that at all costs. And the reason for that is because startups are already hard enough, right? Building a product, getting to product market fit, turning on a sales engine, and to begin with, you generally have limited time and resources, and those limited time and resources need to compete for probability of success. When you get into category creation, it's like having 2 businesses almost. One business is what we just talked about. The other business is educating and trying to get to a position of pull, not push, from the market to talk about this word that you made up, learn ops in our case. Learn ops works because it's relatable to already existing concepts like DevOps or RevOps that people know about. And it's relatable to our market because they can talk about it to other business leaders that they need to get buy-in from and they understand it. But it still was a word that just fundamentally didn't exist in the world, and that's why we have a lot of IP around it, as well as domains, etc., and help to build the ecosystem. So the second product around category creation is awareness, and it's expensive. And you have to really figure out for a company that's already trying to build a product with limited time and money, how do you actually build a category or awareness for a potential category with limited time and money? So that limited time and money basically gets cut in half. And by default, that's the recipe of failure for a startup, because you're now dividing time and attention on two things versus staying laser focused on just one thing. But it's needed to try and do that. So in our case, we got smart about building ecosystem and trying to figure out how do we actually build awareness at scale without having to spend advertising dollars to do it, because it's impossible as a startup to do that. So we got creative and partnered with chief learning officers, similar to these mentors that started who want to give back. These chief learning officers are in love with the mission of how do we make learning operations more efficient and effective. And if we can do that, we can actually run our business function and change the world. So they got bought in, but it took a while to figure out how do we build this army of chief learning officers who want to get involved into that. And then after you do that, how do you get them involved in ecosystems? So one of the things that we do is we built the world's largest community at learnops.com. There's about 10,000 learning and talent development professionals in there. And it's magical because you have these chief learning officers doing these coffee talks or talking about their books or providing free advice to these people in the industry. And one of the things that we did smart was we called that community LearnOps and on a URL learnops.com to help educate the market. We actually started to see job titles forming because of that, which was interesting. So at one point we started tracking how many new job titles are there that end in learning operations. And then that gave us a crazy idea to build the industry's first accreditation program to get people certified in learning operations. And we worked with those same chief learning officers to design that curriculum and offer it to the industry. So I call that ecosystem building, and that helped to build awareness so we could get to a place of pull, not push, to make software selling easier in something that just didn't exist in the world.
Yeah. I mean, three lessons I hear in that I think are really generalizable to this audience. One is that you say avoid category creation, it splits your attention, it's really hard. But if you are going to do it, branding is key. That concept of LearnOps being something that is closely related to a type of a very innovative approach, this DevOps approach that lots of people are familiar with, that also makes people feel very professional. It's respectful for the learning and development community. And then, of course, that ecosystem building around it. Once you have created that brand, have learnops.com, and people are there, and there's a big community of people talking about it, you're then really, building a meaningful buzz, and people will eventually come to you. You get talked about that push to pull, right? You have people coming to you saying, "Oh, you're the ones who do LearnOps. I've heard about LearnOps, right? I want that." Versus you having to explain to them over and over what it is. There's a lot of really powerful lessons in there. One thing I think I know we're at almost at the top of the hour, so I want to do a little bit of a lightning round here. But you both think really a lot about leadership development, and I wanted to sort of ask each of you about your approach to it, because I think it's really relevant to our audience here. Alan, starting with you, you think a lot about this idea of health metrics for a company beyond the financial metrics, communication clarity, leadership alignment. Tell us about how you as a company might measure these healthy metrics that are really about leadership and communication rather than bottom line.
Yeah, well, I've studied leadership development, sort of the science of leadership, expertise, expert performance, probably for the last 30 years. And I would say, if I could sum up a very simple thing, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. If you want to go far together, you've got to invest in developing relationships. You've got to invest in leadership development. And some people are confused by what that means. But simply put, there are a lot of people in this world that are hurting and struggling, and they don't have a great leader. And you can see that, the research is crystal clear about stress at work and anxiety and burnout, and people that are just struggling, and employee engagement at sort of stuck at 30-year lows. that it's all about building great leaderships. If you can build a leadership team where the team knows knows and loves and trusts each other and loves working together and feels like they're skipping to work every day, like that, you're just going to be an unbeatable company versus a team where growth is stalled and there's competing factions about which way we should go and they're sort of lurching from one side to the other. You just can't beat a team that's that tight, that's focused, aligned, clear, healthy. Then everything else gets twice as easy.
And how do you measure it, just really quickly? Because I think that's the hard part for a lot of people.
Well, there are plenty of ways to measure it. We've built a set of diagnostics at StartEd that are leadership and organizational health diagnostics. Think of it like it's like the McKinsey Org Health Index. We're building that for EdTech startups. And we've done it with Ryan, and I work with Ryan and his leadership team and board doing this kind of stuff all the time.
It's powerful. And Ryan, many founders think of leadership development as something, down the line. Once we're a huge company, we'll have corporate retreats. It's a luxury for later stage companies. But you actually, even though you're a relatively small company, you've been focusing on leadership development right from the outset, partially from advice from Alan here. Tell us about what that's looked like and what it's meant for you at Cognota.
Yeah, so it's really powerful because in a startup you're moving a million miles an hour, and you're always looking forward, so it's hard to take a step back. So what Alan's helped to build, the capabilities Alan helped to build across the leadership team is to ensure that we take a step back once in a while to talk about where we're ugly. and it's really powerful, exhausting for the CEO because everything's builds up on, well, it's Ryan's fault, it's Ryan's fault. But you leave after 2 or 3 days with a lot of clarity. So the goal of some of the magic that Alan does with leadership team alignment is to beat things down back to the ground to get to the truth. And you're just asking questions to find the truth. Opinions don't matter. It's just what's the truth. And once we get there and we all admit about the mistakes that we have made because you learn, every day's continuously learning, then how do we build back up as a team, realigned, revigorated, refreshed to tackle the next step in the business? And it's a really powerful tool to do this with your team. Definitely worth the time and investment.
And how often do you do these sort of break it down, build it back up?
Well, it depends on what's happening within the business, at least quarterly, but sometimes more if you're needed, as Alan calls it. Sometimes you have these 5-alarm fires that you got to put out. And if that's happening, then you want to get together and do the exercise.
Yeah, it's a powerful approach. And yeah, I admire that. And I feel like you can tell just from the way you communicate that you are thought a lot about communication in a way that builds trust and psychological safety, as well as, going through that gauntlet of everybody trying to tear things down and get to the truth and building back up. Very powerful approach to not, becoming complacent or letting things fester. Great conversation. I wish we had longer time, but this is Ryan Austin. He's the founder and CEO at Cognota, doing LearnOps for learning and development, and Alan Todd, vice chairman of StartEd and executive chair of Cognota. Welcome. Thank you so much. Welcome. I'm back to the beginning. Thank you so much for being here with us on this EdTech Insiders and EdTech Week collaborative webinar. This has been a great conversation with some real stars of the EdTech firmament, and I really appreciate everybody being here with us. If you are not going to EdTech Week, remember, it's not too late. There will be hundreds of people who are thinking about some of these incredibly important issues: AI, EdTech, what's next, leadership and development, corporate training, career connected learning. The list goes on and on and on. Really amazing people there. And of course, EdTech Insiders, please subscribe to our newsletter and podcast. And last but not least, I really recommend looking into what Learning Commons is doing. You can sign up for the Claude MCP connector right now and add it to your Claude interface and see what it does. It's really powerful. And keep an eye out for all of the amazing things that Learning Commons is doing over the next months. Thank you so much for being here with us. We look forward to future conversations. We have another webinar coming up next week with Amanda Bickerstaff of AI for Education, who's been all over the country training teachers on AI and has a lot of notes from the field about what's working, what's not working, what people are afraid of, what people are excited about, as well as two terrific professors from Teachers College at Columbia who are going to be at the New York EdTech Week conference. They're actually two professors that I had in my time at Teachers College, Columbia University, even though that just happens to be true, and they're both amazing. Going to be talking about how we can make AI pedagogically sound and valuable for content creation and creativity. Thank you all so much for being here. This has been truly a great conversation. I'm honored to have moderated it. We're going to shut things down now, but thanks and have a great weekend and rest of your week. And we will see all of you at EdTech Week.
Thanks, Alex.